Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. This week, we are diving into the life and career of Loretta Lynn, so stick around. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of year again. August 22nd, 3rd, and 4th, we are doing the second annual Kennedy Meadows Music Festival up at Kennedy Meadows here. And tickets are available at kennedymeadowsmusicfest.com, and at checkout, use code GeorgeCroftKM, capital G, capital C. And get you some tickets here. It's great. So I think the cabins are sold out, but there's still room for trailer spaces. There's first come, first served tent camping. The lineup this year for Kennedy's is going to be awesome. We've got Dallas Burrow is coming back, Chad Bushnell's coming back, Dave Stamey's coming back, Trinity Seeley's coming back, Ben Haggard is headlining. And so it's going to be just an awesome show. I can't tell you how excited I am. I'll be there all weekend long. I'll be emceeing the whole thing and playing on Saturday. So come on out and see us here. So get your tickets while you can. All right, but first I've got some dates coming up, so come on out and see me. We'll be into August 1st. I'll be at Diamond Jim's in Mewook. And then August 2nd, I'll be at the Sonora Tap Room in downtown Sonora. August 10th, I'll be at Gaslight Co. in downtown Folsom. August 14th, I'll be at Tano's in Orangevale. And then we've got the Kennedy Meadows Music Festival the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of August. So come on out and see me. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at TylerandCo_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything, when he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. Marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. Ladies and gentlemen, I have some big news coming up here. So I have started an Indiegogo campaign to produce and launch my next single called To Be Enough. And I'm very passionate about this project. It's one of my favorite songs I've ever written. And I'm going to give it 100% effort here to get this thing professionally done, released, and promoted across all the different social media platforms and everything else. Kind of put all my eggs in this basket for now and see how far I can take it. But for that to work, I need public support. And that can be found on my Indiegogo page, which can be found on my link tree, which is through either my TikTok or Instagram account. If you go to my links, my Indiegogo campaign is the top one, and I would love and appreciate any support that you guys feel like giving, and we're going to try to make a real go of this thing. So please, if you don't mind, check that out, and hopefully I'll see you soon. All right, Loretta Lynn is without a doubt one of the cornerstones of American country music. She's just one of these pivotal characters that had a long career and an untold impact across like many of the people we've talked about. You can see her impact across a bunch of different genres and a bunch of different people, and she bounces off a lot of other people that we've talked about in previous episodes. So I'm excited to get into this here. So she's born in 1932 in Butcher Holler, Kentucky. And Butcher Hollow, Butcher Holler, depends on how you want to pronounce it, I guess. But so in her childhood, she kind of, obviously in the 30s in, the hills of Kentucky, it's pretty poor back in the day. And she was born to a coal mining family. She was she was the second of 8 children. And her, her childhood's pretty short here because she grows up, it's not the same as some of these other characters that we've done where they show early interest in music and, and instrument talents. That is not Loretta Lynn here. I mean, she grew up loving music and listening to the radio and the Opry and everything, but she wasn't like marked out as an early, childhood talent musically, like some of the other people we've talked about. But, anyway, so when she's, depending on, I've seen a couple different dates thrown around, but she meets her husband when she's like 13. Some things say 15, some things say 13. They get married when she's 15. And I think they met when she was 13, and she said initially that her mom was not super down with the guy she met. So she meets this guy. His name is, well, I don't actually, his real name was Oliver. But everyone called him either Doolittle or Mooney. She calls him Do, like throughout the whole rest of their lives. And so and he was 21 at the time. So this again, we bump up against some kind of touchy areas where it's like, was that acceptable or was it not? And I think the only well, first of all, Doolittle is not the guy in the spotlight, so they don't get the Jerry Lee Lewis treatment where everybody's, aware and upset. They get married when she's really young. And by the time she's 18, they have 4 kids. And so, and they, and like I said, she's not performing, she's not musically doing anything right this second. And Doolittle, he's an interesting character because he is, like, if you line it up into like the positives and negatives, the positives is he's very supportive of her eventual musical career that we're going to get into. And he's responsible for a lot. Like, he buys her first guitar and he really encourages her songwriting stuff. Like, he's a very supportive dude, and they stay married, their entire, until he dies in, I think, the 80s. So, but on the other hand, he was a mean drinker, and he goes through phases of, like, he beats Loretta up on a couple of occasions, and he's running around cheating on her the whole time. He's got this reputation of being this kind of wild womanizing dude. He actually leaves her initially, like she must be like 16 or something whenever they first split, and he goes off and he has like another girlfriend, I guess, and he leaves her for, I think it's like a couple of months. Like, it's enough time for her to move back in with her parents, and he leaves town and he moves to Washington. And, a few months later, he's calling Loretta and saying, that he wants to be with her, and he wants her to come out to Washington to be with him. And, they didn't get divorced, so they're still married. So, 18-year-old Loretta packs a bag and moves to Washington. And so, like I said, after that initial separation, they stay together, despite the fact that, like I said, he's kind of running around on her for a big chunk of time here. So anyway, they land in Washington. And this is where, she starts to she's writing songs, and she's kind of starting to kind of mess with her musical inclinations. And Doolittle would come home from work, and she'd tell him about, this is a song that I wrote. And she would kind of just sing it for him, a cappella. And she says now, when she goes back and looks at those songs, they were terrible, but he, to his credit, would be like, oh, that's a hit, honey. Like, he was just super supportive of her, songwriting from the get-go. Like, it doesn't sound like he ever tried to knock her down a peg at all when it came to her musical aspirations. So much so that he goes out and he goes to a pawn shop and buys a guitar and brings it home to Loretta and is like, learn how to play like this. You've got something going here. Here's a guitar, get it going. And he kind of stays on her about it. And she does, I think she orders like a a little instructional book on how to play guitar, and she teaches herself enough chords to get by. Like she's not out there, she's not all of a sudden she's Brad Paisley or something, but she's, she learns enough chords to structure the songs that she's writing, and she starts getting some traction going. And pretty quickly here, so this is, and remember, they're around kind of the Seattle area. Also at this time, the first tie-in that we get is Buck Owens is also in that part of the world during this time. So if you go back to our Buck Owens episode, this is the phase where Buck Owens has left Bakersfield because he got this deal at this TV show in Washington. And so he's an up-and-comer, but this is that phase where he's not really happy with, I think he was with Capitol Records at the time. And so he still owed them songs, but he's not writing it all because he felt strangled by their creative process. So he moves to Washington. And so this is that window of time right before Buck Owens goes back to Bakersfield to finish his, contractual obligations with his record label, and then his success follows. But in this window where he's in Washington running this TV and radio show, he was doing talent competitions and talent shows. And hears about this and comes home and tells Loretta, hey, let's go do it. You can be on the talent show. Let's go get you signed up. So they drive to Puyallup or whatever town this little radio station was in. And actually when they get there, they're told, hey, we've got enough, female acts going. We don't actually need, they essentially told her no, but Doolittle was being persistent, and he's like, hey man, we drove all the way here. You just gotta listen to her play one time. Anyway, so they kind of finagle their way onto this talent show, and she wins. And there's actually 2 talent shows that were happening. And this is where she meets Buck Owens. And there's a hilarious interview that happens many years later where the two of them are on the phone, Loretta's with the interviewer, and and Buck calls in, and they're just talking about this whole experience. And it's very sweet and very, just kind of fun to listen to them talk about it. But I guess the prize for winning this talent show was a watch, and you had 2 choices. There was a man's watch and a woman's watch. And so the first talent show that she wins, she, because it was Doolittle's idea, she gets the man's watch to give to her husband. And then quickly thereafter, I think within I'm a little confused on the timeline here, but within a week or 2, she goes to the other talent show, which I think Buck Owens also ran, and she wins that one too. And then she picked the woman's watch from that one. And the funny, so there's a little funny story here where she talks about, because in her mind, she just won this talent show. Everything's great. She gets this cool watch. She gives it to her husband. He wears it to work for one day, and it falls apart. And then her woman's watch also quits working. And so she calls Buck Owens at one point. Is like, hey man, you got to take these watches back. None of them work. And Buck Owens is kind of like, well, what do you expect for $3? This is not. And so it's kind of this the scales kind of fall away from her eyes. It wasn't like she won some high dollar watch. This is a struggling radio station just putting out content. This is their talent show, and they're giving away these watches that they get for $3 a pop just because it's what they could afford. And, but it's, so it's this funny story about Buck Owens makes a joke about I didn't know she was going to put it in her book 30 years later. This, they weren't really planning on that. They were just getting these little trinkets to give out to people. But anyway, so that's, that's where she bounces off Buck Owens, and they, develop a friendship that would last through the decades. But, so she wins this talent show. She gets her watches that fall apart almost immediately. And, but the main result of that talent show is it gets heard that. It gets her the exposure she needs. So, she ends up getting contacted by a guy whose name I will find here in just a second. He's a Canadian investor who hears her voice and decides that's a horse he wants to bet on. and he brings her to Vancouver, Washington, or to Vancouver, British Columbia, to cut a record. And this is like their first taste of success. I mean, they're flat broke when this happens. And so she gets brought to British Columbia. They make a record, and this the company was called Zero Records. And let me see, I got to find this guy's name here. Let's see here, because this guy basically, not only does he pay for the record to get made, he pays for her and Dew to go on like a national tour. So this guy really just dumps a bunch of money onto Loretta Lynn's career, and it's like, go succeed, if you can. So he sets up this whole tour for her. They make this record, and it actually does pretty well. I think it got to like number 14, I think, on the Billboard charts. So for relatively right off the jump, she does great. And so, and her and Doolittle start, touring the country. This guy basically just hands Doolittle like a chunk of money and a couple of credit cards and is like, do it to it, go after it. And it works. So, and this guy whose name I'm forgetting and my eyes can't find fast enough, I think it was the song that she recorded was called Honky Tonk Girl, I think. And that's the one that kind of gets her onto the charts and gets her first exposure. And so she actually gets the attention of Nashville. And the guys at Zero Records were really, I mean, they're kind of, they seem like these kind of angel investor types where like there doesn't seem to have been any predatory stuff going on here. They just put a bunch of money into her career. They launch her successfully. They put her on tour. And when she gets into the orbit of the big Nashville record labels, they go to bat for her because they want to get bought out and they want her career to, to blossom forward. And so she ends up, and so she's writing all of these songs too. Like she's got her own catalog of written songs that she's working on. And there's a phone conversation between, I don't know if it was with Owen Bradley or with, other people at Decca Records, but basically the phone call was about shopping songs, and they told Zero Records, listen, we're not looking for another female act. We're shopping for songs here. We'll take that song. And I think it was a song that Loretta had written, I think. And anyway, to make a long story short, Zero Records basically tells them, listen, we'll give you that song if you take Loretta Lynn. So like instead of money, you take her contract and we'll give you that song, which was they did not have to do that. And that was, if the name of the game was to squeeze as much money as you could out of this scenario, that was not the correct move. If the name of the game is charitably launch this woman's career, that's exactly what the right move was. And that's what they did. So she ends up at Decca Records. And this is in 1961, I think. And so now you can imagine she's touring. She's now gotten signed to Decca Records. She's now in Owen Bradley's orbit. Now, if you remember the name Owen Bradley, that's because we might have to do an Owen Bradley episode here because he bounces off a lot of the people we've talked about. But Owen Bradley in 1960 and 61, we are knee deep in Patsy Cline's story. And that was actually, I think Patsy Cline was the first episode we did. Patsy Cline, at this stage of the game, is on her, she's already gotten some success because she won that talent show. It's a very similar story. So she won a talent show and she gets on with Decca Records. Because remember, she had been stuck, I think it was Star Records. But that was not, Star Records was taking advantage of Patsy Cline, and where she had some success, she was still kind of broke in the beginning. So they had a similar path to Decca Records. Patsy's was much less benevolent. She kind of had a harder time getting there. And so by the time Loretta Lynn gets to Nashville, Patsy Cline is kind of, she's had her, bumps and bruises, and she knows kind of how things work. And so in kind of a funny turnaround. So obviously Loretta Lynn was a big Patsy Cline fan. She's kind of one of her musical heroes. They were similar in age. I think Patsy was only a year or two older than Loretta. Right around the time that Loretta Lynn lands in Nashville is when Patsy Cline has that nasty car accident and gets like thrown through the window of her car, and she's in the hospital. And upon hearing about this, Loretta Lynn on the radio, the intentions were so sweet and pure and everything. She wanted to do a song like, you know, like honoring Patsy Cline sort of, and just kind of as a get well letter sort of a thing. She picks the song I Fall to Pieces, which she recalls being, you know, after the fact, she kind of regretted that pick, like just jokingly, because so Patsy Cline hears this. Patsy Cline is in the hospital and, you know, and takes it like a champ. And she, you know, she thought it was sweet of Loretta to do that. And so she invites Loretta to come see her at the hospital. And so Loretta talks about the irony of having just done this song, I Fall to Pieces. She walks in to see Patsy Cline, and Patsy Cline is kind of in pieces. She's got her legs like in casts because both her legs got broken, and she's like wired to the ceiling and like all like she's pretty much immobile. She got that, you know, nasty head injury that like she almost lost an eye. So when Loretta walks into the hospital room, here's this fully casted up Patsy Cline with only one eye showing. And like Loretta's just sang the song about falling to pieces. So there's this kind of awkward, funny, like, oh, hi. You know? So, but they strike up a friendship that is, you know, very intense. So to the point where when Patsy Cline gets out of the hospital, she really takes Loretta under her wing, because even though Loretta has made it to Nashville and she's been signed with Decca Records, she hasn't started making any money yet. So her and Dew are still pretty much flat broke here. And Patsy really, when I say she takes her under her wing, she's paying Loretta's rent at one point, and she's buying furniture for her house, and she's buying drapes, and she's doing, you know, like she just sees so much of herself in Loretta Lynn and just sets about doing everything she can to help her, you know, make a success of her music career. And to the point where, well, like I said, she's paying for all kinds of stuff. And that's where you get this real first tragedy for Loretta Lynn, is she had actually made like plans with Patsy Cline. The next morning they were going to go shopping for, I think it was curtains or something, like some house thing. It was either furniture or curtains or something. They were like going shopping the next day. And then Loretta hears the news that Patsy died in the plane crash on her way home. And so that was kind of the first real tragedy. She loses her first close friend in Nashville. And I mean, and it, like I said, she's just devastated by that, you know, experience. So that was 1964, I think. So this has been so they've been friends for a few years at this point, because 61 is when she sees Patsy in the hospital. Patsy died in 1964, I think. So it's you know, she's kind of established herself here, and they've struck up enough of a friendship, and so it just crushes Loretta Lynn when Patsy Cline dies. And but she carries on, and so then a couple of years later here, I don't want to make sure I'm not skipping anything super important here, because, you know, Loretta continues working. She continues working with Ray Bradley, who, you know, is equally devastated by the loss of Patsy Cline. But so he starts, you know, kind of doubling down, working with Loretta Lynn. And this is where, in 1970, so this is a few years after Patsy Cline's death, this is where Loretta Lynn releases Coal Miner's Daughter. And Coal Miner's Daughter is the career-defining, well, one of the first career-defining moments for Loretta Lynn. I mean, I think it hits number one. I would be shocked if it didn't. And it, like, you know, so now Loretta's in the money now, and it's this great, you know, she's touring all over the place. She's, you know, the next star of country music. And So much so that, and because Coal Miner's Daughter is a song about Loretta Lynn, like it talks about Butcher Holler and talks about, it's an autobiographical song about her as a person. And it, takes the country by storm. She's like everybody's favorite country music lady now. And then she writes a book. She writes an autobiography kind of about Coal Miner's Daughter. And so, and there's other things happening in the timeline here, but we're going to stick on the Coal Miner's Daughter timeline for a second. So she writes the book, and then let's see here. I think the 1980, which, like I said, we're skipping a lot, but we're just on the Coal Miner's Daughter track here. In 1980, they make a movie about it, and the movie I think is called Coal Miner's Daughter, and this is where. I think Sissy Spacek is the woman that plays Loretta Lynn in the movie, and it's kind of funny because the Tommy Lee Jones plays Doolittle, and so like you can imagine at the time like everybody's still alive, so they're portraying these people that are right there, kind of part of the creative process, and so there's kind of some funny stories about how they gave Loretta Lynn just a stack of photographs of actresses that were like in the running to play her in the movie. And she's going through this stack and she lands on Sissy Spacek, who she didn't really know too much about. And she was even like, she was blonde and Loretta Lynn is brunette. So like there wasn't even like it wasn't necessarily a likeness thing. Just something about the picture of Sissy Spacek grabs Loretta's attention. And she says, that's the one. That's who's going to play me in the movie. And there was a little bit of, back and forth here because Sissy Spacek was not initially super thrilled with the idea. Like she was told by her agent or her manager that this was not the career move, that like nobody wants to watch a movie about a country music star. Like this isn't right for you. And so as these conversations are happening, Loretta Lynn goes on TV and just says, oh yeah, we're making a movie and Sissy Spacek is going to play me. And that's like before any contracts have been signed. And when that interview came out, Sissy Spacek was kind of mad. She's like, what is this lady doing? Just going around telling people I'm going to play her. I haven't agreed to this and I'm going to say no probably. And, but then shortly thereafter, they have a conversation about it. And Loretta, I think, has a conversation directly with Sissy Spacek and is kind of, does her best to kind of talk her into it. And she says that night, Sissy Spacek is just praying all night for an answer about like what to do. And when she flips on the radio, Coal Miner's Daughter is the song that's playing right when she turns the radio on. So she takes that as a sign like, yep, this is what I'm supposed to do. Not only does she say yes, she fires that manager that was talking her out of it. And which turns out to be the correct move because Sissy Spacek wins an Academy Award for this deal. Like that turns into a giant career success for Sissy Spacek. So, and the movie's a giant success. It has the desired effect. But anyway, and this is in the 80s. So like that's it does a lot of work, not only to like kind of redirect attention back to Loretta Lynn, so she gets a big career boost out of this deal too. But anyway, so kind of let me back up in the timeline here because by the time 1980 rolls around, there's a few other things that have happened here. I think 1984, her one of her children dies. Let's see here. So so the main thing that's going on here, I think in 1971. Yeah. Okay. So Coal Miner's Daughter is 1980. We're going to back up to 1971. 1971 is where Loretta Lynn meets Conway Twitty. Now, Conway Twitty was already a big star at the time, and he was also at Decca Records. And Loretta Lynn had actually had a poster of Conway Twitty up like at her house. Like she was a fan, and she was, she loved that guy before she even met him. And one day she's at the studio and she's not paying attention to like who's around. She was there, for her own reasons at Decca Records. and somebody was in the control room working on their own project. Anyway, Owen Bradley comes walking out of that control room and is talking to Loretta, and says to her, like, well, what do you think of Conway Twitty? And she was like, oh, he's, great. Like, I just love Conway Twitty to death, and blah, 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 just talking about how much she likes him. And then Owen's kind of like, you want to meet him? And she's kind of struck for a second. Is like, oh, I don't think I ever could. I would be a mess. And he goes, well, he's right here. And just like, so Conway Twitty comes walking out of the control room and meets Loretta Lynn. And she has this kind of starstruck moment. And they're, very sweet. And they're friends almost immediately. They proceed to go on a run of successful hits. Like they were, I think they were called like the Diamond Duo at one point, because they just start cranking out hit after hit after hit, and their voices complement each other so well that like people often think of them, like if you're thinking Conway Twitty, you're hearing Loretta Lynn's voice on all of his best records. And they, like I said, not only are they collaborating together, they become very close friends. And the Doolittle and her were both Conway Twitty fans, but, so they were very, there wasn't ever a romantic relationship here. This is very above board. They're just very close friends and, and working together and just racking up success after success. And they're obviously, going on through the years here, developing that friendship. Let's see here. So, and they crank out at least 10 albums here. So we've got like 1971 is We Only Make Believe. Louisiana Woman, Mississippi Man was 1973. That hits number one. And then let's see here. They had, the ninth album they worked on was called Diamond Duet, but that's because they'd kind of like, I think they'd earned that nickname by that point. And then Two's a Party was 1981. That was the last, new recording. Other albums get released later, but they're like compilation albums, like Best of, Conway and Loretta. And so albums are getting released, through 2005, I think. And anyway, but 1981 is the last time they like make a new record, because 1981 followed quickly by 1984, which is where Loretta's son Jack dies in a tragic drowning. Like he was a big horseman type of guy, and he was I don't exactly understand I haven't dug very much into what his actual life was like, but anyway, he dies like riding his horse across a river, and he ends up drowning. And that just guts Loretta Lynn. And obviously, I mean, she says that she had like a full-on mental breakdown, and she keeps touring and she keeps performing, but that was another just tragedy befalling her here in 1984. And like I said, you kind of, we're lined up again where it's like she's achieving success, she's at the top, her career's taken off, but on the home and family front, she's kind of getting knocked down a peg here and there. To Loretta's credit, despite some medical issues, she does get hooked on pills at one point, but she seems to fight it off pretty well. Like she ends up being prescribed pills for some other medical issues she was having, but she doesn't fall into that here like most of our other characters have done. Like she's able to kind of fight that off. And she continues, singing and playing and touring all over the place. Her and Kanye. That's going to be on the blooper reel. Her and Conway Twitty, achieve continued success through these years here. So, but now we go back to, the space, that 10-year space between, or 9 years between 84 and 83 is full of relative success. Well, this is where, keep in mind, Doolittle is still, this whole time, his reputation is still kind of running around on Loretta a lot. He's kind of a mean drunk, drinks a lot, and he ends up with diabetes, and he doesn't handle that very well. So over time, he's getting surgeries where they're amputating things. So like first he loses, I think it was like toes first, then he loses a foot, then he loses both feet, and then so eventually diabetes works its way up to where they amputate both of his legs below the knee. And so, and he's got, heart issues, and he's not a healthy dude. And so in 1993, another blow comes to the scene here, because Doolittle ends up in the hospital for, I think, open heart surgery. And I think he's the hospital. I think the hospital was in Springfield, I think. But anyway, so Loretta is at the hospital with Doolittle because he's just had open heart surgery. And while she's there dealing with that, Conway Twitty comes through the door of the, Conway Twitty is admitted to the hospital, and he has suffered, I think it was an abdominal aortic aneurysm, which is basically just like, your aorta blows a hose and you're just dumping blood into your chest cavity. And that's happening to Conway Twitty. And and that's like an immediate thing. Like, he's fine, he's up and around, and boom, a couple hours later, he's in the hospital about to die. So he shows up at the hospital while Loretta's there with Doolittle. And so she's like running between rooms, checking on Conway, running back, checking on her husband. And so it's all just coming at her, all at once. And she tells a pretty heartbreaking story of like being in Conway's room with his wife, Dee. And basically, like, they had started off in the waiting room. She runs downstairs to check on Dee, and the doctor comes out and is like, "Do you want to see Conway?" And the way he said it kind of tipped her off, and she was like, "Why?" He's like, "Because he's going to die. Like, you need to go say goodbye to Conway here." And initially she's like, "No, I don't want," she was just not, she felt like she didn't have the gas to go through that experience, but Dee is there in the same moment. So she goes with Dee to see Kanye. I keep doing that. To see Conway. She goes with Dee to see Conway. And it's this very sad moment where, like, she's telling him, "Hey, you're going to get through this, and it's going to be fine. You've been through tougher things than this." I actually don't think he was conscious when she was saying this stuff to him. And so she's like, "Okay, hold on, I'll be right back." So she runs out of that room to go check on Doolittle. And in the span of time where she's gone, Conway Twitty dies. And she ends up back in his room a few minutes later, and she's like holding his hand, and she tells that she basically had the idea in her head that his spirit was still there floating above the bed. So she is grabbed a hold of Conway Twitty's hand, yelling at him, "Conway, get back down here. Like, get back in, don't go anywhere." And obviously that does not work. Conway is dead. But so you can just imagine this lady, two of the most important men in her life are in the same hospital, just a few doors away from each other. And she's running back and forth, hoping neither one of them dies. And then, Conway is not so lucky. Doolittle does survive his open heart surgery. But so that obviously is just another gigantic loss. I mean, you can imagine, Conway's band and everybody, like, it's kind of similar to the Marty Robbins story where, like, nobody saw this coming. It was just a very tragic, very quick, he's here, now he's not. And that does do a lot to kind of dampen Loretta's career right this second. Like, she continues performing and she keeps working, but obviously she's just crushed by this deal. And so we go through some, relatively, quiet years here. I mean, she does release this, and like I said, they do keep releasing like the collection albums and the, like greatest hits and the whole thing of her and Conway. So she's, she's still working and she's still, part of this process here through the 90s. And then, let's see here. She gets a TV show briefly. I think it was called Loretta Lynn and Friends. And, but anyway, so then in 1996, so that was 1993 that happened. So 3 years later, Doolittle dies, and he dies from complications related to his diabetes. Like that, all of his health issues were, diabetes caused by his drinking and kind of fast lifestyle here. So he dies in 1996. And again, that just another gigantic blow to her, Actually, I think I missed one here. One of her other daughter dies of emphysema somewhere in here. And but anyway, so Doolittle dies in 1996. So there's a few quiet years here where she's really not, performing as much as she used to, obviously for plenty of good reasons. And then in 2000, so this is 4 years later, she kind of makes a little bit of a comeback with Still Country, which is like her first solo album since her work with Conway Twitty. And and that does a little bit to kind of, bring her back into the public spotlight. Now, this is where we get, so in 2001, so 2000, she has, Still Country comes back, and she's back kind of in the zeitgeist of things going on. And this is where we get a really interesting string of collaborations and stuff here, where Jack White shows up on the scene. Jack White of the White Stripes. And, I think I read somewhere that he was, I think in the Rolling Stone or something, he was voted like one of the top 20 guitar players of all time. Like Jack White is his own cool story and career and kind of a wild dude. And, but anyway, he had been a Loretta Lynn fan from the time he was a kid. And at one point he was like driving from, I guess between gigs or something. And he sees a sign for Loretta Lynn's house that is like, she had like the Loretta Lynn's ranch or whatever. And you could go like tour the house and kind of see what she had going on. And I don't know if he stops there, but seeing that sign and seeing the house kind of puts a bug in his ear. And he dedicates, I think, either a song or an entire album to Loretta Lynn. Album, yeah. So it was the White Stripes album, White Blood Cells. He dedicates that to Loretta Lynn. Now, Loretta Lynn hears this, and she thought it was sweet. So she like invites Jack White and his girlfriend to her house. And this is where we start to see a really sweet relationship develop between her and Jack White, where like he talks about going to her house, and by the time he left, she like sent him, she brought him over for dinner. She cooks for everybody. She makes this homemade bread that she like, when he leaves, he's leaving with a stick of butter and a loaf of bread that he describes as the best bread he's ever had in his life. And so, but they are instantly, there's just a lot of chemistry between those two. They're just instantly good friends. And, he obviously, I think he makes several trips back to her house, and is, they've struck up this friendship. Well, one day, I don't know if it was the first day that he was there or not, but Jack ends up in Loretta's house kind of going through some of her old notebooks and stuff. And he ends up finding all of these songs that she'd written that were not just unreleased, unrecorded. This is just notes from her, like her little handwritten pads. And he's kind of, what's this, Loretta? And what's, like, okay, well, and he gets in and like, he's going to make an album with Loretta Lynn now. And they do. And Jack White produces, the album, I think it's Van Leer Rose, I think is the name of the album. But, and he is like knee deep, like Jack White does this album for her. And I think she said that, he only let her do one take of each song. So like, and she was, talented enough to pull it off. So that wasn't like a stretch for her or anything, but it wasn't like a long stretched out process. It was like Jack's working on the back end. He let her come in, do one take of each thing. And I think they win a Grammy for that album. Let's see here. Let's see. Van Leer Rose is released in 2004. It peaks at number 2 on the Billboard charts. And then, so it peaks at number 2 and wins a Grammy in 2005 for Best Country Album and Best Country Collaboration. For the collaboration vocals is for the song Portland, Oregon. And anyway, and it kind of does have the effect of like introducing Loretta Lynn to Jack's audience and the kind of the younger country audience of America at the time. So she gets a real kind of second wind in her career from her work with Jack White. And she gets back to working, and she's, performing and touring and kind of putting on shows. And, yeah. So, and then they perform together at the Ryman, which is really cool. So like the Ryman Auditorium is, the home of the Opry, and that's where it all started. It's not there now. Now the Opry has moved to its own building, but for decades it was at the Ryman Auditorium. And so they perform together there and like make a cool piece of history. And they remain friends for the rest of Loretta's life. So, but yeah, just a cool kind of second wind for her career. And she continues on that. She keeps performing. She's got her family with her now, so she's like, her son was on stage playing with her. I think he played guitar for her for like, the last phase of her career here. And she ends up, so Loretta Lynn dies in 2022. And obviously, and Jack White was a big part of, paying tribute to her afterwards, and kind of, he has lots of nice and sweet things to say about Loretta Lynn kind of after her death. But anyway, so Van Lear Rose, because of Jack White, is kind of one of the last big highlights of her career and life towards the end. So, but yeah, and she just bounced off of all kinds of cool careers and people, that we've kind of talked about in the past. So we had to pay some homage to Loretta Lynn. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next week.